My son stood up in the middle of the family lawyer's office, pointed at me, and said, "She never contributed anything real. The house belongs to my father's estate, not to her." I was 63 years old. I had lived in that house for 31 years. I had painted every room in it, planted the garden out front, held my grandchildren for the first time in the kitchen. And my son Oliver, the boy I had nursed through pneumonia twice, whose university tuition I had worked double shifts to help cover, looked directly at me and said I had contributed nothing real. The room went quiet. The lawyer, a composed woman named Ruth Calloway, glanced up from her papers. My daughter-in-law Priscilla sat beside Oliver without blinking, and I sat there in my good coat, the navy one I always wear when I need to feel steady, wondering how a life could be reduced to a single dismissive sentence in a beige office in Hamilton, Ontario. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to go back, because nothing that occurred in that room made sense without understanding what came before it. My name is June Ashby. I was born in Sudbury, raised in a small house with loud winters and parents who believed that work was the closest thing to prayer. I married my husband Gerald Ashby in 1989, at a church in downtown Hamilton that no longer exists. We were both 32. He was a civil engineer with steady hands and a good laugh. I was a registered nurse with 12-hour shifts and a habit of fixing things before they broke. We were not a flashy couple. We did not take expensive vacations or drive luxury cars. What we had was a house on Fennel Avenue that needed new windows every decade, a backyard where Gerald built a deck 3 summers in a row until he finally got it level, and a life that was ours, genuinely ours, held together by 2 people who showed up for each other every single day. Oliver was born 2 years after we married. We wanted more children. It didn't happen. So we poured everything into him, perhaps more than we should have. Perhaps that is the part I got wrong. Gerald was the kind of man who made lists. Grocery lists, repair lists, 5-year financial plans on yellow legal pads. He managed the large decisions. I managed everything else, which in a household means managing most of it. I handled the bills, the insurance policies, the RRSP contributions. I scheduled the contractors, negotiated the mortgage renewals, kept the filing cabinet organized the way Gerald never could. When Gerald's engineering firm went through difficult years in the mid-90s and he lost his job for 14 months, I was the one whose nursing income kept us from losing the house. I picked up overnight shifts at St. Joseph's. I quietly moved money between accounts to cover the property tax. I told Gerald everything would be fine and I believed it, because the alternative was unthinkable. He found work again. The firm he eventually joined became successful. Gerald moved up. His name appeared on project rosters across southern Ontario. By the time he was in his late 50s, people respected him professionally, in ways that made him stand a little taller at dinner parties. I noticed that he stopped mentioning my shifts at those same dinner parties. It happened the way these things always do. Not suddenly. Not with a dramatic argument or a slammed door. It happened in small, quiet erasures. Gerald began traveling more for work. His firm had expanded. There were contracts in Calgary, in Vancouver, in Winnipeg. I understood. I truly did. I had my own work. I had friends. I was not a woman who needed constant company. But then the trips became longer. The phone calls shorter. He would come home from 2 weeks away and seem almost annoyed to find me there, as though returning to the marriage was an obligation rather than a relief. I told myself it was stress. I told myself he was tired. I told myself the things a woman tells herself when she is not ready to face the truth. The first time something truly unsettled me was a Tuesday in November. Gerald came home from a week in Calgary carrying a new jacket I had never seen, smelling faintly of a perfume that was not mine. I did not say anything that evening. I sat across the dinner table and watched him eat, and talked about Oliver's new job in Mississauga, and pretended the jacket did not exist. That night I lay awake for a long time. Over the following months, I paid closer attention. There were charges on the credit card for restaurants I had not visited in cities where Gerald was traveling. There were evenings where he stepped outside to take phone calls, something he had never done in 30 years of marriage. There was a woman named Carolyn mentioned once in passing, a project coordinator at a partner firm, and then never mentioned again, which bothered me more than if her name had come up regularly. When Gerald turned 65, he took early retirement. I assumed this would bring us closer. Instead, It seemed to give him permission to become a stranger who lived in my house. He was distracted. He was irritable. He criticized small things. The way I loaded the dishwasher, the brand of coffee I bought, the fact that I still worked part-time at a walk-in clinic because I was not ready to stop being useful. One evening I asked if he was happy. He looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable and said, "I think we've grown in different directions, June." I put down my tea. "What does that mean?" He shrugged. "It means I'm not sure this is working anymore." I did not cry. I sat very still and felt something cold settle in my chest. After 31 years, after every shift and sacrifice and silent compromise, this was the sentence I received. "I'm not sure this is working anymore." The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later. I was not entirely surprised, but I was not prepared either. Those are different things. What I was not prepared for was what the papers contained. Gerald was claiming the house should be part of the estate division weighted toward him on the grounds that his engineering income had been the primary financial contribution to the household over the length of the marriage. His engineering income. I read that phrase 4 times. His engineering income, which had disappeared entirely for 14 months while my nursing shifts kept the mortgage paid. His engineering income, which I had supplemented through years of overtime while he rebuilt his career. His engineering income, which existed in part because I had managed every financial, logistical, and domestic element of our lives so that he could focus entirely on his work. His engineering income, I called my son that night, hoping for comfort. Oliver answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was careful in a way that told me immediately the call was not going to go the way I needed it to. "Mum, I know this is difficult," he said. "It is difficult, yes." A pause. "I just think you should be realistic about what you're entitled to." I felt the ground shift slightly. "I'm sorry?" Dad built his career over decades. The house was mostly purchased with his earnings. I sat down. "Oliver, I worked full-time for 30 years. I covered the mortgage alone for over a year when your father was unemployed. I managed every account, every renewal, every mum." His voice had that tone. The one that appears when a grown child has decided their parent is being unreasonable. That was a long time ago. There it was. That was a long time ago. As though sacrifice carried an expiry date, as though the years had washed away what I had actually done. "Are you taking your father's side in this?" I asked. A longer pause this time. "I'm trying to be objective." I ended the call. I sat alone in the kitchen for a very long time. The house was quiet. The garden outside the window was going brown with October. I had planted every one of those perennials. I had hauled soil and moved stones and coaxed things to grow in a yard that Gerald always said was too shady. The following morning I called a lawyer. Her name was Diane Okafor, a family law specialist in Hamilton, who had been recommended to me by a colleague at the clinic. She had a direct manner and the kind of steady voice that makes people feel they are not entirely lost. I told her everything. The pension contributions I had helped maximize. The refinancing decision I had managed in 2003 when interest rates dropped. The 14 months of single-income mortgage payments. The records I had kept in a filing cabinet in the spare bedroom that Gerald had never once opened. When I mentioned the filing cabinet, Diane leaned forward slightly. "Do you still have those records?" "All of them," I said. She nodded slowly. "Then your husband's position may have some significant problems." I spent the next 3 days in the spare bedroom. It smelled of old paper and cedar. I had not opened those drawers in years, but the files were exactly where I had left them. Property tax receipts going back to 1991. Mortgage statements. Pay stubs from the years I worked overnight. Bank records from the 14 difficult months, with my deposits visible and Gerald's employment income absent. In a folder at the back, I found something I had forgotten entirely, a letter. Gerald's handwriting on the firm's letterhead, dated 1997. He had written it during the worst of the difficult period, when we genuinely did not know if we would keep the house. "June, I don't know how to tell you how grateful I am. None of this would be holding together without you. If we get through this, and I believe we will, it will be because you carried us. Love, Gerald." I sat on the edge of the spare bed with that letter in my hands for a long time. Diane said she definitely needed to see it. 3 weeks into the legal proceedings, something unexpected happened. Gerald's project coordinator, a woman named Sylvie Beaumont, who had worked with him for the past 8 years, requested to speak with Diane's office. I had heard the name Sylvie mentioned once or twice over the years. Gerald had described her as efficient. He had never described her as anything else which I had noticed at the time. I did not know what to expect when Diane told me about the request. Part of me braced for something that would make everything worse. Instead, Sylvie Beaumont appeared at Diane's office on a Wednesday afternoon, looking composed and uncomfortable in equal measure. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed, with tired eyes that suggested she had not been sleeping well. "I know why you might not want to hear from me," she said, looking at me directly. "I understand how this looks. How does it look?" I asked. She glanced at Diane, then back at me. "Like I'm involved in something I shouldn't be." I waited. "I'm not," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever you've been told or assumed, I am not the reason your marriage ended." I kept my expression neutral. Gerald had mentioned Carolyn, not Sylvie. I had spent months thinking about the wrong name. "Then why are you here?" I asked. Sylvie set a folder on Diane's desk. "Because I've worked alongside your husband for 8 years, and I've watched him take credit for things he did not do alone. And I've watched him construct a version of the last 30 years that isn't accurate. And when Diane's office sent formal financial disclosure requests, I recognized some of what was being misrepresented." She opened the folder. Inside were emails, internal project records, and financial documents relating to Gerald's pension and firm compensation structure. "He listed certain assets as individual professional property," Sylvie said. "But some of those were structured during years when your household finances directly supported his ability to invest in the firm's equity program. I processed some of those documents. I know the timeline." Diane examined the papers quietly. I looked at Sylvie. "Why are you doing this? This could affect your position at the firm." She looked down at the desks, then back at me. "I sat in a meeting 3 months ago where your husband described his domestic situation to a colleague. He used the word comfortable. He said his wife had always been comfortable at home." She paused. "I've worked double shifts, Mrs. Ashby. I have a daughter and no co-parent, and I know what it costs a woman to carry a household. I couldn't sit with that and say nothing." I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. Diane picked up the folder. "This is helpful," she said carefully. "We may need you to formalize some of this." Sylvie nodded. "I know." She looked at me once more. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." The preliminary hearing happened on a cold Thursday in February. The courthouse on Main Street was exactly as impersonal as courthouses always are. Fluorescent lights, the smell of old carpet, people moving through large institutional hallways carrying documents that contained pieces of their lives. Gerald arrived with his lawyer, a senior partner named Philip Barrow, who wore his confidence like a good suit. Gerald looked the way I had expected. Composed, assured, certain of the outcome. He had always been certain of outcomes. It was one of the things I had once loved about him. He glanced at me briefly in the corridor. He did not say anything. Inside the hearing room, Philip Barrow presented Gerald's position methodically. Gerald had been the primary income earner. Gerald's career had funded the majority of household assets. The marital home represented Gerald's professional achievement. My contributions had been domestic in nature, which Barrow described as supportive, in a tone that made the word sound like a small thing. Supportive. 31 years reduced to supportive. Diane's responded without theatrics. She introduced the mortgage records, the bank statements from the 14 months, the pension documents Sylvie had flagged, the letter dated 1997. When the letter was read aloud, the room became very still. Gerald stared at a fixed point above the judge's head. His jaw tightened, but he did not move. The judge, a careful, unhurried woman named the Honorable Justice Patricia Lund, reviewed each document without rushing. She asked several precise questions. When she directed them at Gerald, he answered confidently. Too confidently, I thought, for a man who had written that letter. At one point, Justice Lund asked him directly, "Mr. Ashby, during the period between 1995 and 1997, what was your employment income?" Gerald's lawyer began to object. Justice Lund raised one hand slightly and waited. Gerald answered. The number was 0, as the records confirmed. His income had been 0 for 14 months, and the mortgage had continued to be paid. The room was quiet for a moment after that. Oliver was not in the hearing room that day. He had not come. I had half expected him to appear on his father's behalf. Instead, he had sent a brief message that morning, saying he hoped everything would be resolved fairly. After calling me a woman who had contributed nothing real, the hearing was adjourned. No ruling that day. But the atmosphere in the room had changed by the time we filed out, and I suspect Gerald felt it too. That evening, Oliver called. I almost didn't answer. "Mum," he said when I picked up. His voice was different, quieter. "Yes. Priscilla told me what happened in the hearing today. Someone sent her a message." I waited. "The letter," he said. "Dad wrote you a letter." "Yes." A long pause. "I didn't know," he said. "About the 14 months, about any of it. Dad never." He stopped. "I was a child, I didn't know." "You were a child," I agreed. "I'm sorry for what I said in the lawyer's office." I looked out the window at the garden. The October brown had given way to February white, everything buried under snow. "I know you are," I said. "That's not enough, is it?" "It's a start," I said. "Come for dinner on Sunday, we can talk properly." He came. It was not a simple conversation. It was not a reunion movie scene with tears and everything repaired in 90 minutes. It was 2 hours of careful, uncomfortable honesty between a mother and a grown son who had let fear of his father shape a choice he should not have made. We did not fix everything that evening, but we did not pretend nothing had happened either, and that, in the end, mattered more. The ruling came 5 weeks later. I sat with Diane in the waiting area of the courthouse, both of us holding coffee that had gone cold. I had slept badly the night before. I kept thinking about the garden, about the deck Gerald had rebuilt 3 times to get it level, about the kitchen where I had given Oliver his first bath in the sink because we couldn't afford the proper baby tub yet. Justice Lund's ruling was thorough and precise. She addressed the financial record directly. She noted that the marital home had been maintained during a period of complete sole income dependency on one spouse, on me, and that this represented a material financial contribution that could not be dismissed as merely domestic in character. She noted the 1997 letter as contemporaneous evidence of acknowledged contribution from the respondent himself. She ruled that the asset division would reflect genuine partnership. The house, the investments, the pension accumulated during our marriage. She was careful and fair in a way that Philip Barrow's settled confidence had not anticipated. Gerald sat very still when the ruling was read. I did not look at him with triumph. I am not built that way. But I did look at him, steadily, and I thought about the man who had written that letter in 1997 and wondered when exactly he had decided to forget. Outside the courthouse, Diane shook my hand. The February air was sharp. I had not driven. I had taken a cab, because I hadn't been sure my hands would be steady enough. "You did well," Diane said. "The records did the work," I said. She smiled. "You kept the records. That was true. I had always kept the records." A week later, I went to find Sylvie Beaumont. I had her contact information through Diane. I called first. Then we met for lunch at a cafe near the waterfront in Hamilton that I had always liked for its quiet. It was early March. The ice on the bay was just beginning to pull back from the edges. She looked less tired than she had in Diane's office. She wrapped both hands around a cup of tea, and we talked for a long time. Not about Gerald, or the firm, or the legal proceedings. We talked about her daughter, who was 8 and had recently learned to skate. We talked about my years nursing, and the particular texture of night shifts, and what it means to keep a household running so silently that no one notices until it stops. "Thank you," I said eventually. She looked at the table for a moment. "You don't have to." "I do," I said, "because I thought you were someone else. I spent months thinking one thing about you that was completely wrong, and you came forward anyway." Sylvie looked up. "I knew what people assumed." Gerald knew, too. He didn't correct anyone. She paused. "That bothered me more than anything, the deliberate misdirection, the comfortable, useful misunderstanding. I had been so busy looking in the wrong direction. I sold the house in June. People told me I was foolish. I had fought so hard to protect it, and here I was letting it go. But when I walked through those rooms after the ruling, I felt the weight of 31 years in a way that wasn't grief exactly, but wasn't comfort either. Every corner had a story that belonged to a version of my life that was finished. I didn't want to live in a museum. I found a condominium on the Niagara Escarpment, smaller, quieter, with large windows and a balcony where I put containers of herbs in the summer. The first morning I woke up there, I lay still for a while and listened. No sounds but my own. I made coffee and stood at the window and watched the light come over the escarpment, and felt something I had not felt in longer than I could clearly remember. Uncomplicated. Oliver and I rebuilt slowly. There are no shortcuts for that kind of repair. We talked on the phone more than we had in years. We had Sunday dinners, some easier than others. Priscilla was cautious with me for a while, which I understood. Trust returns at its own pace. I did not rush it. As for Gerald, I heard that he had moved to a condominium in Burlington, that he had, apparently, been seeing someone, a woman who worked in a professional context I was never entirely clear on. Whether that relationship had existed before our divorce, I chose not to pursue. Some answers cost more than they return. What I know is this: he called me once, about 2 months after the ruling. I almost didn't answer that call either. When I did, he was quiet for a long moment. "June," he said. "Gerald." Another pause. I didn't expect it to go the way it went. I thought about many responses. "I imagine not," I said. "I think," he started and then stopped. "I think I convinced myself of a version of things that wasn't honest." I considered that. It was not an apology. It was the closest he had ever come, in 31 years, to admitting something about himself that was unflattering. For Gerald, that was significant. "I know," I said. We did not speak long. When I hung up, I sat with the quiet for a while. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel healed. I felt, strangely, like a woman who had been carrying a very heavy bag for a very long time and had finally set it down on the side of the road. The spring after the divorce was finalized, I started volunteering at a legal aid organization in Hamilton that supports women navigating family law proceedings without the resources for private counsel. I did not start a foundation. I did not give speeches. I simply showed up on Wednesday afternoons and sat with women in a small room with good light and listened to their situations and helped them understand what documents mattered and why. I kept the records, Diane had said. So I taught other women to keep theirs. There is a particular woman I think of often. Her name was Barbara. She was 67, from Brantford, and she arrived the first time with a plastic shopping bag full of papers that she had saved for 30 years, without knowing why, just some instinct telling her they mattered. They did. She walked out of her proceedings with a settlement she had not expected. She sent me a card afterward that said simply, "Thank you for telling me my papers were worth something." I kept that card, because sometimes the work we do in silence is not invisible at all. Sometimes it is sitting in a drawer, waiting for the moment when it finally speaks for itself. And sometimes, in the middle of the worst winter you have known, the truth turns out to be exactly where you left it.